Oh, hi there, friends. Mandy here. Restorative grief is all about creating easy access to healing no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, my 31-day guidebook is available to order on Amazon. Embracing our losses without losing ourselves is a reflective journey into the holistic needs of grievers and learning to support yourself, mind, heart, body, and spirit. Don't just wing it, you can lean into grief work with a guide. The link for the book and more are available in the show notes, and as always, you can reach out with questions. But for now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 181, titled Help and Hope for Hurting Teens with Clarissa Moll. If you've ever been around a teenager who is grieving and had absolutely no idea what to do, this episode is for you. My guest today is Clarissa Moll, an award-winning author and bereavement advocate whose work has transformed so many lives. Her latest book, Hurt, Help, Hope, a real conversation about teen grief and life after loss, takes a profound dive into the unique challenges of adolescent grief, offering practical tools and compassionate insight. Co-written with her daughter Fiona, Clarissa's latest work is a Q&A style workbook for teens and their adults to develop understanding, foster community, and work toward the lifelong journey of grief integration and expansion. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today I'm really honored to bring you an author that I've admired for quite a few years now. Her work is remarkably gentle and invitational, and the latest book that she's just produced with her own daughter, Fiona, is a missive and a workbook and an invitation into teenage grief and helping guide teenagers through the loss in their lives that they experience. So, Clarissa Moll, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Mandy.
Absolutely. So, your latest book, Hurt, Help, Hope, a real conversation about teen grief and life after loss, is not just something you woke up one morning and thought, oh man, what an underserved population. I can show up for them. So, I would love for you to tell just a little bit of your story and really um, help us understand why you knew in your bones that this was an
Mhm.
important work to write.
Sure. Well, in 2019, my husband Rob died in a hiking accident on our family vacation. So entirely unexpected. We were 3,000 miles away from home at a campground, and so it was jarring to say the least. It really exploded our lives. We had been married for almost 17 years. We had 4 children. This was not the course that we planned for our life to go, for our family's life to go. And so overnight, I found myself being a single parent, raising 4 children on my own. And over the last 5 years, I have done just that. I've raised all 4 of my children through almost every developmental stage of grief. From the early years, my daughter had just turned 7, my youngest, when my husband died. So we've done elementary school grief, we have done middle school grief, we have done high school grief, and we have done college grief. We've done all the things. And, over my season of parenting over the last 5 years, I've really leaned on resources that would be helpful for me as a parent to understand what grieving looked like for children at different developmental stages. But what I found was that there was very little in terms of resources for teenagers. And I think it kind of makes sense. Teenagers are a little bit of a unicorn developmentally. They've got 1 foot in childhood, 1 foot in adulthood. Sometimes they act like a 3-year-old. Sometimes they have conversations with you that feel very adult like. And so I think it's hard to pin them down a little bit. And so I wonder if perhaps we have avoided those kind of conversations with teens because they are a little bit more complex, less cut and dry. And so when I came to my work of bereavement advocacy, I said, you know what, we really need to create something that is uniquely for teenagers by teenagers, a resource that isn't preachy or didactic, that is full of research and it is based in empirical studies, but it really meets students where they're at in the kind of companionship that they need as they process loss and as they grow forward into adulthood and in their lives after loss.
That's beautiful. I think a lot about those books early on when I was trying to teach people how to help their kids grieve and just thinking like,
Mhm.
man, these are very reductive and prescriptive. These
Yeah.
are so framed in our adult understanding,
Mhm.
limited as it can be in some areas of loss. These are never going to show up for teenagers the way we want them to, simply because we also have books that say how to talk to your teen without infuriating them, how to get to know the person that lives in your house without acting like a complete crazy person. It just, we do not know how to let teenagers exist. We want to shape them and form them into something that's comfortable for us as adults. And I think that's a big part of why your work is so necessary. It helps us recognize, oh, that's right. Just like grief, teenagers are often untenable and make no sense to any of us. As you and Fiona were working on this book together, what did you recognize in her that started to teach you, oh, that's something I've overlooked in the loss process or in the grief process?
Well, one thing that we know is that 1 in 12 students in the US will lose a parent or a spouse before they turn 18. And I think when we look at a statistic like that, when we think that 300,000 students will experience a shooting in their school community, they will come face to face with death in the classroom before they graduate. One of the things that stands out to me is my daughter Fiona was not unique. And I think when you're experiencing a deep loss in the context of your family, it's very isolating. You feel like nobody could understand what you're going through. You look at your teenager and you say, they're going to walk into a classroom where nobody gets it, where nobody understands what it is to navigate this kind of loss at this age. But the reality is that there are far too many students who do get it. And I think, coming from that space of you are less alone than that you think you are, was a really important place for us to begin in me parenting Fiona through her teenage years and then also writing this book together. When we begin with the premise that you are very much alone, it shapes how we interact with our loss. It shapes how we interact with relationships after loss, how we plan for our futures after loss. And part of what we want to do in this work is to normalize the grief experience for teenagers. For too long, our culture has sort of isolated grief and death and loss to entertainment, violent video games or movies that have a particular arc that sort of ends at the funeral and doesn't talk about what comes next. And we want to dispel those kind of mysteries and myths that our culture has held on to for so long. Because the reality is that each of us at some point in our lives will face loss and, I used to encourage my kids, you know, you may be the only person in your class at school who has lost a dad, but you're not the only person in your class who has experienced loss. And I think for students, that can mean divorce, that can mean a family estrangement, that can mean a big move that has caused a major disruption in their lives. It can mean a terminal illness in their family and the uncertainty of ambiguous loss that comes around that. And so I think normalizing loss for teenagers, we think that it will break them, but I think it actually frees them to make this part of the warp and woof of daily life.
Yeah, that ability to normalize grieving out loud for teenagers is so integral to their development as humans, like the ability to become resilient, to practice those resiliency skills in a way that is actually truly resilient, not the way we look at children and say, oh, they're so resilient, they bounce back. No, they're in pain and you don't have space for them to be not okay. That is such a gift to teach your teens to develop that kind of space holding for others and themselves. And I love what you said about, you're not alone in your grief, even though you think you're the only one that's experienced this. Because yes, our grief is so unique. I highly doubt Fiona has a peer who lost their father in the same way. And yet, there are people she knows who've lost a parent that can relate around the story and not even relate, but be able to hear and validate what she's experiencing and saying, oh my gosh, me too. And there's something that is so um, relieving when you hear someone say, oh, I've experienced something similar. How are you doing with, and name an odd experience they had that you thought was so unique and so specific to feel that kind of being seen. How did you experience that, witnessing it in your children as you started to create space for them and say, well, I've had similar experiences, kiddo. This is what I know to be true for me. What about you? How did you see this experience affecting your other kids as well?
Well, certainly my impulse as a mom was to fix things. And
Sure.
and I wanna put that out there, because not only do I think that that was probably, my greatest struggle, but I think it was also my greatest strength. That, we desire to fix things for our children. We don't like to see them hurting, and grief is not an easy, quick fix. It is not something that can be fixed. And so we come face to face with our powerlessness in that. And yet, I think it's our impulse to look for something better that actually drives us to become the kind of parents that our children need, our students need, if we're teachers, anybody who's interfacing with a student who's experienced loss. And when I think about, how that affected the way I interacted with my other children, it was about becoming a curious observer,
Mm, mhm,
being willing to show up without answers, to be able to sit around the kitchen table and say, "Hey guys, I don't know what I'm doing here. How can we figure this out together?" A lot more emphasis on collaboration,
yeah.
on curiosity, on patient and reflective listening and observing. And, when we see a problem, our instinct is to be the person in charge. And, when our kids have experienced a significant loss, they do need that stability. They need an authority figure. They need someone who can chart a path forward for them. They rely on that. And yet, they're old enough, they're wise enough, they're emerging adults enough to know that the adults in their lives don't have all the answers. And so I think it sometimes it feels like a very delicate needle to thread, to be able to say at once, "Hey, I'm going to guide you through this. I'm going to walk with you through this. And I don't know where I'm going either, but I think it's that tension that students actually can understand and they receive as honesty, as authenticity. They really embrace that.
I'm thinking a lot about my own high school experience right now and how there were teachers in the school who were absolute bullheaded, be quiet, sit down. I know what I'm the expert here. I'm the educator. You need to stop and listen. And then there were teachers who held space for us to be teenagers who weren't punitive when it was noisy in the classroom, but played along to the degree of, hey, I'm with you. This is hard, or this is too much, or I'm tired too. And just honoring our own humanity as teenagers, we saw through it. And as adults, to lose that wisdom and that insight of what we know, I think is very quick, right? We get to that point as an adult and think, okay, thank goodness. Now I'm the authority. Clarissa, I can't tell you how many times since losing my mom in 2016 that I've turned around and said, I need an adult. I need
Hmm.
someone who can have wanton, unearned confidence about knowing what to do next, because this is incredibly humbling to feel so open and untethered while grieving.
Yeah, very true. And I think that our book, Hurt, Help, Hope, really tries to honor the space of mystery that exists for
Mm,
teenagers that they see,
mhm.
that adults tend to want to compartmentalize or reduce, because you look at a grieving teenager and there is such a tenderness to them that it feels as though you could hold them in your arms if they were small enough. You
Yeah.
see their fragility, you see their vulnerability in a way that perhaps you didn't see when they got their license and they were feeling independent and really, go get them about the future. And part of our work in Hurt, Help, Hope is to acknowledge not only the sort of emotional vulnerabilities or the physical vulnerabilities that we have after loss, but to address a lot of those soul searching big questions that students have that don't have easy answers, the how and the why questions, the questions about spirituality and the future, these things that are really a big part of what it means to grieve as a teenager. And I think to learn to sit well with a teenager who is grieving, to be able to hold those questions in mystery, to create space for them. That's the really hard work. And it's the ongoing work, if we're honest, the ongoing work of grief for our students, not only in their teenage years, but also as they enter adulthood too.
Here's something that's so interesting. We talk a lot in restorative grief about people who are experiencing very strong secondary losses of identity, of their faith practices, of their communities when they encounter grief. And with adults, it's a lot more jarring in the sense that they had this very solid idea, typically, of who they were, where they belonged in the world, what made sense for them. And grief upends the apple cart to the degree that we're putting together so much more than we expected to recover. I'm thinking about teenagers who are in the middle of figuring out who they are. There's no solid ground or very little solid ground. Maybe they have one passion that they're like, yes, I'm a theater kid through and through for the rest of my
Mhm.
life. I feel like theater kids are the most passionate. That's why I stuck with that one. But what have you witnessed in Fiona and other students around you through that specific part, that identity formation that gets to really become wizened beyond their age, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to frame it, in
Well,
such a setting?
I think part of the beauty of adolescence is learning how to carry your story,
Mm.
learning how to enact it, how to articulate it, and it is always changing. And I think that's actually a really um, it's really fertile ground for students who are grieving because grief changes you, loss changes you. And, if we are a little bit more calcified as adults, I do think we find that to be very upending. And yet, for students, the thing that I notice more and more as I interact with grieving teens, as I interact with those who are interfacing them with them on a regular basis, is that the shifting identity, the malleable identity, is actually a gift to them in
Yeah.
grief. That it may come as a surprise to us as adults, and perhaps that's why we find them to be such a mystery because they can get out on the soccer field and play their heart out, and they're not sitting by the sidelines, totally bereft and just unable to move on into this new setting like we may feel like we would be. And I think that constant movement and changing that is a part of those adolescent years when it comes to identity is a beautiful gift to those students. It's a mercy to them because they can grow and emerge with their grief as it grows and emerges with them. And so, I often tell my own kids, you can tell as much of your story as you want to people. You can tell them that you lost your dad or not tell them that you lost your dad, depending on what place that part of your story takes up in you in that particular moment. And I love that for them because as they're growing and they're shaping their identities, they're also shaping this narrative about how their loss has impacted their lives. And the beautiful thing is that we know that students will regrieve at each developmental change and milestone. They're going to experience their loss in a new way. If they experience their loss as an 8-year old, say, they may have a period where it feels like they know themselves in relationship to their loss until they hit menstruation or they hit prom or they hit graduation and it feels so raw and new to them. And that's why we never want to talk about healing when it comes to grief with our students because we know that grief isn't a wound that will close up and be gone after a long time. It's something that's emerging and changing, just like the stories they're telling about themselves. And so, as they're able to carry that story and allow it to shape them and them to shape it over time, I think it actually makes them more resilient as they come up on these milestones that we know are going to cause a resurgence of grief for them in ways that can really kind of blindside them if they weren't prepared otherwise.
There's something David Kessler has always said about children and calling them puddle jumpers, how they can
Mm.
move between depths of sorrow and really expressing it, and then recognize that in our language, they've metabolized it and move on to playing again on the field. And then
That's right.
afterwards, just being hungry and allowing that physical need to be met. It's such an incredible lesson for us as adults to just give in to those, I'll say, baser needs and recognize that's also part of that
Mhm.
growth process, that integration of grief in our stories. And I'm curious about something you just said. I would love to hear you talk on it more. This is why we don't talk about healing with kids in that context because we as adults can say grief is an ongoing experience. We know it is something we are constantly revisiting and re-understanding our relationship to loss and to grief. But I would think children are more open to that idea than adults. There's certainly a lot of adults I know who are very resistant to, what do you mean I don't get to heal and put a period at the end of the sentence? How does that conversation, how does that part of the topic hit with kids and their parents?
I think it's equally hard for all of us
Mm,
to realize that we have this companion who has shown up and isn't going to leave. That I'm going to go to college and I'm not going to be able to shake the fact that I don't have a dad. Someone is going to ask me about this. Or I'm going to start dating someone and they're going to ask, what's your family like? And I'm going to need to tell them, or do I not tell? When do I tell them that I've lost my sibling? You know, uh, it it is hard to think that this is going to travel with us for our whole lives, that we will always be having to somehow navigate, negotiate our stories around our loss. Um, and yet, there's this element of, I would say, rest and peace within that as well. That if I can allow something to change with me all the time, it presents me with the possibility of hope and change, that I am not always stuck where I am right now. And, one thing that students often will ask is, when am I going to feel better?
yeah.
And don't we all want to know when we're going to feel better? And that's part of the beauty of this, that yes, you will feel better. You will never feel exactly how you feel right now. And that is a gift, that is a mercy. You're going to change with your grief along the way. And so you don't need to worry about healing, because that growth and transformation as you engage with your grief with self-compassion and kindness, it's never going to be what it is right now. And I think for most students, they're less concerned about the future. They have an inherent hopefulness that is embedded in their young and growing bones, which is beautiful. And so if you can reassure them that what they feel right now isn't going to last forever, I think oftentimes that's the most that they need to be able to set their feet in the direction of hope for the next day.
I think kids are predisposed to trusting us as well when we say it's going to
Mhm.
be okay.
Yeah.
I know adults are like, how dare you? How do you know? And part of
Mhm.
that question is like, well, I define okay and better differently than you do, probably. And so that's a fair pushback. I think
Yeah,
with kids, we are in a unique position to teach them to define better for themselves. How
that's
does
right.
it feel different for you today than it did yesterday? What do you like about that? What do you not like about that? What do you want to do about that? Right. And really
Yeah.
instilling that autonomy and that self efficacy in kids where there's so little resistance to that. They want autonomy and self efficacy. They want to be the driver. They want to be maybe not the bill payer. I do keep warning my 10-year-old,
Yeah.
you want to be a grown up so bad. Here's a water bill. Go take care of it.
Uh-huh.
But there is a beauty in that developing brain that we have access to in such a sacred way when
Yeah.
we get to see that heavier side of their lives.
Yeah.
Let
And I actually often I will tell a student, I can't tell you I can't tell you it's gonna be okay. I can't,
Mhm.
because I don't wanna create a false sense of control for you. Um, N Can I guarantee nothing bad will ever happen to you again? No. And if you've watched a child experience loss, that's what you wanna do. You just wanna bubble wrap them up. I remember
Insulate them.
there was a picture book that I used to read to my kids, when they were little, called Cotton Ball Colin, and it was about a mother who stuck cotton balls to her little bunny son so that he would never fall down and be hurt. And we understand that impulse, and so we can't tell our students with any kind of confidence it's going to be okay. But what we can tell them is that you are going to be okay, because you have control over you. And, through the things that you face, through the way that you engage, you can learn to be okay in a wide variety of circumstances. And I think for those students who feel so powerless in the face of their loss, they know that we can't guarantee nothing bad will ever happen again, but we can empower them to say, you can develop the tools so that you will always be okay. And I think that really can give them confidence and a direction in which to step as they try to figure out, where to go next in their loss.
I'm curious what you would say to grandparents. I'm thinking about grandparents who are totally of a different generation, especially you and I are a very different generation from our parents and our grandparents as well. And even the other day, my daughter said, "Do I need a straw so I can suck it up?" And I was like, "Who told you that? That's not something I would ever say. And that's not something I've heard. So where'd that come from?" And being able to like rewrite the narrative. Hey, if someone tells you to get a straw and suck it up, put my voice over that, right? That's different.
Mhm.
But how do you talk with grandparents who are equal parts? I just want to be the fun grandparent again. I'm, putting them all into one specific box. I want to be the one that makes them laugh, that feels like comfort, that feels like safety. Um, how do I help my grandchildren grieve when I just want to say, like, it's going to be okay. You're fine. We survived depressions. We've survived, right? Minimizing and taking the emphasis away from the process for them. What would you say to grandparents?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting that you use the word minimize because I think from our perspective, that's how our generation sees that kind of talk. And I would say to a grandparent, you're not minimizing it, you're just looking at another side of the elephant. We've seen that there's this old story of these blind men who were
Yeah.
touching an elephant and they're asked to describe what it was, and one is holding onto the trunk and one is touching the foot and one is holding the tail and one is touching the side of the elephant, and they all feel something different. And if you only talk to one man, you would think the elephant was hairy all over him, or was smooth all over him because someone was touching the toenail. And I think that's what it's like when it comes to grief,
Mm.
that in some ways each generation has a kernel of wisdom to share with the next generation that left alone doesn't fully describe the experience, but can be a really good perspective if it's taken within a broader context. When I think about, the greatest generation or boomers, folks who are grandparents right now, I think about resilience. I think about the hard things that they had to face and the ways that life called them to fortify themselves,
Mm.
to push through, to face hard things and sort of pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And, research tells us, post traumatic loss research tells us that there is some element of stick to itiveness that
Mhm.
is deeply necessary for our resilience after loss, that there is a commitment to stepping forward, to trying your best, to experiencing hard things and not turning away from them, that is vital to our growth after loss. And so I would say to those grandparents, you are on the right track, but don't only say that message
Yeah.
because that's not the whole elephant. Because the reality is that pushing through is exhausting. Pushing through makes you physically sick. It can make you emotionally sick. It can make you minimize things you really should be paying attention to. And you'll carry those wounds later into life unaddressed. And they're going to affect all kinds of things in your relationship with other people, with work, your inner relationship with yourself. And so I would encourage those grandparents, just broaden the conversation, touch another part of the elephant.
It's
What
so
does it
good.
look like to say, I'm okay being weak? That
Mhm.
sometimes I'm just really tired and that's okay, to be able to say crying is natural and normal. That some people are going to feel angry and we need to create space for anger. I think that for all of us, there is a different part of the elephant we all can learn to touch as we
Mm.
expand our understanding of what grief is, to give our kids a fuller picture of the many, many ways that they can engage with their loss. Uh, in healthy ways, in productive ways, in really kind and self compassionate ways.
Yeah. I love that you used the word fortify because it's such a visceral and very demonstrative word, right? That idea and this this is the other half of that suck it up conversation with my daughter was, what about if instead of saying toughen up, which can sound harsh, which can sound naive or narrow in a phrase, what if we asked ourselves, is there an area where I can demonstrate some toughness right now, where I can pull
Yeah.
out some toughness? Can I
Hmm.
get back up? And she said, well, yeah, of course I can get back up. I'm like, okay. So it's not that the person is unable to
Hmm.
speak to you, it's that the way they're maybe framing it doesn't quite wrap or envelop all of the intensity of what you're experiencing. Make space for it and then demonstrate that back, reflect it back. Well, I can find some toughness, but don't tell me to toughen up because that just makes me want to sit down and, I don't know, my teenage defiance or my preteen defiance and not listen to you because you're not the boss of me. Anyway, let's talk about your book for a second. So the book is written in this beautifully invitational like process format. What was some of the processes in that book that, or maybe just one that really resonated with you and the way you showed up for your kids as time has gone on?
Well, it's a phrase that you'll see repeated throughout the book. In fact, I wondered at one point, should I do a search and find in the document in the manuscript to see how many times I said it? But we talk about one trusted adult. If you're not sure, talk to a trusted adult. If you have a question, talk to a trusted adult. And the reason why we did this is that, and why we created a book that's in a question and answer format, is that we know that students need somebody more than their peers. They need something more than a book or a podcast to be able to help them navigate their loss. They need community. And, the Surgeon General's advisory a couple of years ago on student mental health has shown us that students are more isolated than ever. Social media reflects back to them the things they want to hear, not necessarily the things they need to hear. And so our students are already longing for deep and meaningful community. And when it comes to grief, they can feel awfully alone and not know who to talk to. In fact, a New York Life Foundation study told us a couple of years ago that over 70% of students said that they didn't even know who to talk to after their person died. They weren't sure what to talk about, who to talk about it with. And so we know that they are longing for community and conversation, but they don't know where to find it. And so that phrase, a trusted adult, is really just like it's like that beam of a lighthouse on a stormy night. Here's that flashing light. It's going to come on throughout the book, reminding you there is someone out there that you can trust, that you can have a conversation just like we're having in the book here, a question and answer kind of conversation. And we honestly, when a question is unanswerable, we say we don't know in the book, and we hope that adults will too. But to regularly encourage students toward community was something that through the writing process we began to see was more vital than even the sort of nitty gritty. What do I do when I don't have an appetite anymore? When I can't concentrate in school? There's so many resources that can do that. But are we consistently pointing students to community? That's something that I feel like the book really uniquely champions for students as they navigate loss.
That's something I've told my daughter as time has gone on. Hey, you're going to have things that you don't want to talk to mom and dad about, and
Mhm.
you don't have a grandma that's readily accessible to you. So, how do you identify who are the trusted adults in your life? And she has access to some of my friends who've said, Hey, I will be that person for your child. I will step in. I think that as an adult, that's our opportunity to help them identify those trusted adults because a coach may not be the person that has capacity for that. A teacher or other people, other adults in their school may not be the right ones simply because of like the context of the relationship. So I think that that's such a beautiful reminder that there are trusted adults, and if you only need one, you don't need
Mhm.
13, you don't need an entire roster of people that you can call upon that you can really lean into, and that you can have more than one too as well.
Mhm.
It's not just one person's word is now gospel.
Yeah.
Ah, how have your younger children responded to seeing what Big Sister has produced with you? How are they feeling about it?
Oh, I think they're excited. I mean, well, I know they're excited.
Yeah.
They have been so genuine about their enthusiasm for this project. And really, even though Fiona and my names are on the cover, this is a family work. These are words that are born out of our family's experience. These are stories that have been enriched by our living them. This is a book that has been sort of tested through fire, and not only through the fire of my other children and Fiona and me as we have navigated loss, but through the lives of other students. We include the voices of other students who have experienced a wide range of losses, friends and siblings and parents, grandparents, because we want students to hear from a wide variety of voices. To the point that we talked about earlier at the top of the show, that it doesn't matter so much what kind of loss you've experienced.
Mhm.
When you have stood at the graveside of someone you love, you are indelibly linked and marked to other people who have experienced loss.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that Fiona shared with me recently that was so touching to me as she reflected on the process of writing this book and being in community as she experienced loss was she said, the thing, Mom, that has made such a difference to me is that I feel like I know what to say to other people now. Like I can comfort them because I've watched how we have taken care of each other, how we have sought out help. And I think for students who desire a sense of agency, who want to feel like they're useful in the world, that they have something to contribute, to be able to say to a student, you are empowered now to care for other people. And it is an empowerment you never wanted to have.
Yeah.
These are skills you never asked to be able to hone, um, but you're going to need them. And frankly, there are a lot of adults who are kind of behind you
Yeah.
in terms of developing these skills.
Yep.
You are on the front, you are a front runner when you come to the kind of wisdom that life has brought you. Go out and use that superpower for good. And I think that that can be really transformative for students when they realize that the hard things that they've experienced are the garden in which, some really beautiful things can grow.
I love that, Clarissa. There's no way for us to ever make it okay, like you said,
That's right.
but that gives us the power to recognize where do we have influence? Where can we transmute this intensity into intentionality so that we become more fully who we were becoming and who we want to be in the future for each other and for ourselves.
Yeah.
Ugh,
Yeah. It's what we call in grief work making meaning, right?
yes,
We're
that's
making
right.
meaning. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So your new book, Hurt, Help, Hope, a real conversation about teen grief and life after loss is available, of course, through your website, through Amazon, through all the places. And how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in hearing more about your work?
Yeah. Well, I love to connect with listeners and readers. So you can contact me through my website. I love to hear your stories. It's an honor to be able to walk beside people who are grieving, even from a distance. There is a kinship to loss that is really precious. It's intimate. It's more intimate than, a lot of folks that you've known for years. When you know somebody who has experienced loss, there is a deep friendship there. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. Love to talk to people and connect with them, and yeah, to be able to spur them on and wish them well as they face their own grief with kindness and compassion, and as they point their feet toward flourishing too.
I love it. Clarissa, thank you so much for writing this book, for being a leader and a voice in the grief world. It's such an honor to connect with you and hear your story today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode 181 of Restorative Grief. Clarissa's gentle approach to redirecting grief from an isolated experience to one of openness and honesty is a beautiful invitation for anyone who knows a child or a teenager, but even for ourselves as adults. To be touched by loss at such a tender time in life is complicated at best, and Clarissa's latest book is a fantastic companion for anyone looking for guidance on how to help. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you for being here. It's an honor to host conversations with brilliant minds and resources in the community of grief work. So I hope that you will both subscribe to the podcast and make time to connect with Clarissa. Check Check out the show notes for links to resources from this episode, and if you feel so inclined, leave a review as well. Thank you as always to my patrons, because you are a gift to me and to so many others. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.